Hey everyone, good to see so many of you, especially the people on the balcony and the best seats in the house. You know exactly where to sit. Just got a short kind of alert, warning, announcement that there aren't any jokes in this talk, so you might be disappointed by that. But we just learned from our wonderful track host that she knows the funniest joke in the world. It's scientifically proven to be the funniest joke in the world. Apparently there was a British man who wanted to find the scientifically funniest joke in the world. I don't know what the joke is. He doesn't know what the joke is, but the track host knows what the joke is. So if you want jokes, they won't be in the talk, but the track host will give you all the jokes you need. So yeah, I'm Nick. I work for a French company called Payfit. Payfit is a payroll company, fiche de paiement. Previously, I've been a consultant, worked a lot with Eduardo for various clients in various industries, and a lot of my work has been all around modernizing old systems. Yep. Eduardo.
And I'm Eduardo Silva, and as Nick said, we have done some work together, and I keep on doing, so I'm still an independent consultant, and around these topics. And actually, so what Kenny and Evelyn were talking about, quite a few topics that are covered in this conference. And today we are going to be talking about effective execution of architecture modernization. And so, like, how can you continuously do that? But before we start, we want to get out of the way. So what do we mean by architecture modernization? And I couldn't find a better person than someone that wrote a book called Architecture Modernization. So, Nick, can you enlighten us? What does that mean?
No.
Okay. So
because you have to tell us what this image is
okay,
first.
Yeah. So this is...
Is this scientifically the funniest image in the world?
This is a funny. This is a hotel in a city north of Amsterdam. So this is by design. So this was not a modernization project where we had multiple architects just piling up stuff. This was planned. This is a good, yeah, I found it an interesting image.
Okay.
But let's get serious, Nick.
Yeah, let's get serious. So when we talk about modernization, there's a lot of words and ideas get thrown around, a lot of very technical thoughts like re-platforming, moving from on-prem to the cloud, applying new tooling like Kubernetes and things, adopting patterns like microservices. And those can certainly be things that you will see as part of a modernization journey, but really the thing that we're always focused on is what does this enable? Why are we modernizing? And usually it's a very simple proposition. Things in a company are currently not possible or too expensive because the current system, the way the current system is architected and implemented, creates too many constraints, inefficiencies, and difficulties of evolving the system, which has those significant business impacts. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about this.
Indeed. So what we really, when we talk about architecture modernization, we take it from the perspective of as a business enabler, right? So this shouldn't just be yet another technical thing. This is actually a business enabling thing. We always actually start our workshops, when we used to do workshops together, this was the first thing that we would ask people to tell us about. Like, what are you trying to achieve? Start seeing that. And then, and when you are trying to modernize, you are trying to solve things such as these. These are sort of almost real quotes from clients, right? So it's difficult to evolve existing products and create new products, right? So this is a business problem. We have many teams working at the same time on trying to get something done, or we need this special project, right? With the expert, the only person that is able to do that. Or sometimes, this is a real example, Nick and I actually worked on this together, you just started building a lot on a platform that seemed like a good idea, but in time it wasn't a good idea. So these are the sorts of things that we mean when we talk about architecture modernization. Nick.
And one of the common questions we always get, right, is like, you're doing these talks, you're writing these blog posts about these long, multi-year modernization programs. Isn't it just like big waterfall? Why are you talking about this? Why are you recommending this? And we're not recommending this. Yes, you should be doing modernization on a continuous basis. But the reality is for a lot of companies, they don't do that. They build up lots of legacy. And so it's necessary to have a big investment to start rebalancing the system, improving the quality of the system. So just a small caveat, we're not saying you should do these big modernization investments, but you need to get to a point where you don't need to. And that's kind of what we're focusing on today.
So, typically when you start doing this sort of journey, you will be probably doing some sort of workshop where you bring people together, you start seeing, okay, how can we get, particularly these bigger modernizations, how can we get out of this situation? What could be options for us? This is a picture from a workshop that Nick and I did in Toronto a few years back. So we had, this was almost, the whole company was there. Amazing venue, probably the best place we had a workshop on.
It was a whole floor of an office that was being renovated. So we got basically like a whole floor of an office.
It was amazing. And so here we start exploring options. We start seeing, so you see like an event storming there on the wall. You start seeing that, how can we get out of this? And this can be a way that you start seeing how can we navigate, how can we start taking steps. However, Nick, maybe...
So we love workshops, right? It's a great chance to go meet the clients, go to some expensive restaurants that the client's paying for, have really amazing food. And we find that a lot of modernization start with big ideas and big workshops, and there's a lot of hype and excitement. Who here has been in some kind of workshop where you start talking about modernization and talking about ideas? It doesn't have to be event storming, but you've got together as a company, let's really think about modernizing. So a lot of people have been in that situation.
Now, keep your hands up, the ones that had hands up. And how many of you actually started implementing and seeing those ideas getting through, like effectively? Keep your hands up. Quite a lot. Wow, you are amazing. Because typically this is where we see a lot of issues. So we do the workshops, but then what, right? So what happens after that? And this is what we are going to be talking about today. Right?
Yeah, so we meet, since we've done previous talks and blog posts about having these great modernization Kickstarter workshops, people always come up to us and say, oh yeah, we've done that, but then nothing happened afterwards. And we realized, yeah, we've experienced this ourselves, but it seems to be quite a big problem, right? Like more reaction than we thought, like, oh yeah, it's nice to have workshops, but then what? So today we're going to talk about then what, this whole long journey of executing and implementing ideas. And we try to capture our thoughts and experiences in like different patterns and ways of thinking and models. And the first one we have here is really thinking, when we looked at all of our ideas and we put the narrative of this talk together, we were thinking, how do we frame this modernization journey, how to execute effectively? And we thought, well, you need to have the organization organized in the right way, good organizational dynamics. That's kind of your foundation. And then you also need to think about the actual work itself, prioritizing, planning, conflicting priorities. And so we felt like these are the two aspects to keep in mind and how they fit together. And we'll start with the organization first, and then talk a bit more about how, I wouldn't say managing the work, that might upset some people, but making sure the work gets done, right priorities and stuff. So the first topic is really, and one of the first challenges is having the skills in your company to modernize. So very often, as we were talking about, people will come and say, yeah, the workshops are great, but now what? Where do we go from here? So when we dig into this and we try and understand why are people coming at us with this question and saying it's such a big problem for them, we try to understand, yeah, where is that coming from? And well, what do you think, Eduardo? Where is that coming from? Why are people coming to us saying workshops are great, then what? Why do they not know what needs to happen next?
Yeah, so what we noticed quite a few times is that sort of this idea of actually starting modernizing in a more continuous fashion feels more like the idea of a marathon, right? So we can't just do it, although Nike tells us that you can just do it.
Was that the joke, by the way?
This was it's
she's
just
not listening. Maybe that was the joke.
But we can't do it tomorrow, right? And this is what we see often in organizations is you want to do it, but you actually can't do it effectively yet. But just the idea of starting doing something, practicing, pretty much like preparing for a marathon, is something that helps us to basically train and start getting further on being able to actually eventually do a marathon effectively. So what we are talking about here is acknowledging that there will be some sort of architecture capability gaps. We use this word architecture capability gaps, but we mean quite a lot of different things, like teams are all working on the same code at the same time. So this is not the monolith, the modular monolith idea, but people really intertangled, or people may not just be able to start. They may need some help. Maybe we don't have those skills in-house at the moment to do certain work of modernizing some things. People may be too much pressured to actually deliver features and more features, and not having the time to look and see what can we do, etc., etc. So
we heard in the previous talk from the guy who was talking about IBM WebSphere.
Yes.
I think he said something like, when you make choices, some people are resistant to those choices because making a certain choice creates a skills gap. People who will be involved in implementing those ideas won't have the skills, and that might create fear from making a decision or implementing a decision. And this is definitely something that we see a lot. If you've got developers who've been working in this monolith for a number of years in this legacy system, and you're asking them to use different tech and different ways of working, they don't have the skills to immediately start applying those ideas. So one of the most important things a company can do when starting out on modernization is to identify as quickly as possible, what is your skills gap? What are the skills that your company needs to effectively modernize that you don't have? Want to tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah. So exactly, trying to, well, in a nutshell, embrace that there is a gap, and you can't fix this overnight. So you will need to do some investment on this. And this may mean very different things. And the other aspect is that we draw here this idea of inertia. This is not like, oh, we are going to buy this training, and it will solve our skills, and everything will stop, and wait for us to get into the green. This is not going to happen. There is always going to be this inertia to try to pull you down to where you are and not allow you to move forward. And this is where Nick and I started, as we were going through these journeys of helping clients. We started seeing, in order to actually make, particularly on the first steps when you are having big modernization projects, and you don't have the skills, you don't yet have the rhythms to be able to run the marathon, you may need a sort of some people that can put quite some effort on helping you have those gaps. And this is this idea of the Architecture Modernization Enabling Team, or AMET. This is really an idea of, you probably can't read, but like, what are, given the skills gaps we have, given the objective for the modernization on this part of the organization, who could help us to make a big step on modernizing this? Who should we need to have there? So here we have an architect, maybe a product manager, maybe an engineer from a given team that knows a lot about this topic, maybe a consultant, because we lack on this skill. And then they together would work with those teams that are involved. In this case there, it's a little, it's a monolith that we would like to modernize. There is some issue there. So this is the key idea. We are making a big investment on this part and make sure that we can sort of jump that gap that we have.
So we're a company, we've got a bunch of teams working in a legacy system. Modernization isn't going to work by just dropping bits of modernization work in all these backlogs, is it? Just trying to fit it in around what's going on. We need some intervention in the organization, and that's where this concept of an architecture modernization enabling team comes in. Yeah. It's not something that we invented or created. There's no trademark on it. Something that we observed, right, in our experiences with different companies and personal experiences. But what does it take to put in place an architecture modernization enabling team? What are the kind of skills and responsibilities you need? So one of the first challenges, as we talked about, is that initial momentum. A lot of modernization efforts, like we talked about, might not go beyond those first couple of workshops. So what can an AMET do in this situation to get over that first hurdle? So this is where we look at those workshops that we talked about, and an AMET can help to set up those initial workshops in a way where it's part of more of a sequence of events, designing a series of workshops, thinking about what will come in the next steps, and having that longer-term perspective, and thinking about this journey. These initial workshops are part of a longer journey, and they're going to facilitate this process. So obviously, these might not sound like skills that a typical architect has, and that's one of the first points, that an AMET is a variety of skills, not just necessarily architects in the team. Maybe you can take us through the next point.
Yeah. So another one that we often see is the lack of certain skills to do the work, as we were saying. So the lack of experience of designing, say, modern architectures or other things. And this is sort of where this AMET, by having those sort of skills, can help out with. So, I don't know, facilitating some software architecture workshops, doing some DDD deep dive workshops with the teams, maybe having office hours where the teams with problems can come and get help. And so here is really having that very dedicated, as Kenny was saying, a resource, right? Really time to get through these things.
I just realized I'm looking at you, but I can hear your voice coming through that speaker behind me. It's a very strange experience. It's like a double Eduardo experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so something else that's important is around the framing and the communication and the purpose. A lot of people might be thinking, why are we modernizing? It's not going to be like day one, everyone's on board. And there might be certain parts of the organization that get involved in modernization first, and others might be thinking, where do we fit in? Are we part of this? What's going on here? I'm going to keep my job and stuff. So again, in those early stages where you want to get momentum, keep things moving, it's really trying to bring everyone along with you. And that's what the AMET can do, to make sure progress is being shared, to bring people in to the journey, even if they're not directly involved. And as we talked about, this is kind of a marathon, and we need to be thinking about what's coming in 3 months and 6 months and 1 year. And these teams that aren't involved now, we want them to be ready and excited, so when they are involved, they can start executing as soon as possible and not having these hurdles to overcome every time we start to increase or scale our modernization.
Yeah. Nick, I think we'll need to speed up. We still have 3 to go.
Okay, let's speed up.
The second, it's so cool. AMET was cool. AMET helped 4 of our 50 teams. And now what? So an architect, this is a real example. Now, how do we get this actually to more teams in the organization, right? Nick.
Yeah, so as we talked about, we're coming on to the topic of scaling. At the start, you can have an AMET who's working with a small group of teams here, and you can see that the whole company's not modernizing, and this AMET can start to help get things moving in a few teams, but an AMET can't work with the whole company all at the same time. So what we try to do is see the AMET as more of a kick-starting. The purpose of the AMET is not to do the modernization work, It's not to create a plan. It's not to feed the team. It's not to guide the teams. It's kind of like spinning plates. Try and start some plate spinning, and then get some more plate spinning, and you might need to come back to stop these plates falling over, but they got a bit of momentum, so you can start scaling the effort. Things can start to work independently and not fully. I'm talking too much. We need to go quicker. Over to you.
Yeah. And by the way, this is, we are sort of just assuming you understand. These are like team topologies diagrams, so the yellow things, streamline teams. I think by now most people know this. And the AMET is just another enabling team. So as Nick said, helping to address missing skills and capabilities. And one thing that we started seeing is that in time, so helping this group of people, helping kickstarting that, but if we want to scale, we should try to, how can we get into this idea of more continuous self-service, if you will, modernization? Like how do we get all the teams start doing that more on their own and not requiring always help from yet another AMET? And this is where we start coming into this idea of, oops, this is very fast. Like this idea that certain things about what we are learning, what's helping us as organization to modernize, can be encoded into something like an idea of a platform, right? So it's some things that we are encoding that other teams can self-service and just do it without requiring an AMET or an enabling team. So there will be still time. So here we have like 3 layers. This is not a layered architecture, by the way. It's just 3 types of things. So they're on top. There may be situations where we don't yet have on our platforms the necessary practices or the necessary principles that allow us to do a certain type of modernization. So maybe there is when we still require an enabling team to help us out or help those teams. But most of the time, we want there in the middle teams to just be able to modernize by leveraging these principles that we codified in our platforms. And those 2 on top, as we are discovering things, they should also feed those new learnings into that platform that then self-services everyone. And just there on the corner, pool-based, right? We don't want modernization enabling teams to go and push things into the teams. We want the teams to pool. We have this problem and we need someone to help us out. So if you think in terms of practices, there you could have like these modernization enabling teams. Here in the middle, you have your teams just doing their work. Maybe also this idea of sometimes we have these staff plus engineers or enabling architects that they may exist and help multiple teams. They may exist in bigger organizations. But here on the bottom, you have things like, I don't know, team APIs, RFCs. Andrew talked this morning about the advice process, some alignment resources, and everyone can sort of leverage this. And we are building this continuously. We are improving that continuously.
If I could just add one point here, I know we need to be careful on time, but I really do think this is really one of the key things once you get started, because what I've seen on a number of occasions is that you have some kind of AMET-style team, but they go around the company doing ad hoc modernizations in different teams in different areas, and over time, as you're modernizing, and you have to support all these different ad hoc modernizations, it gets very expensive and very difficult. You solve similar problems multiple times, and it can be overwhelming. So I really do think that's one of the key points, this self-service modernization. Get those plates spinning, and then give the plates the tools to keep spinning themselves.
And you forget about the plates.
Forget about the plates until it all crashes in production.
Okay. Yeah. So now we are going to, as Nick said, getting a bit more into addressing the work of modernization. And in this case here, balancing modernization and non-modernization work. Because this will still happen, right? It's normal. And this is also a almost real quote. Well, you can do modernization as long as my 3 top priorities are done in H2. Yeah, Nick.
So unfortunately, in a lot of my experiences, you can have the best workshops, you can have the best modernization PowerPoint decks in the world, But it's like this overwhelming fear, like, I know we said we'll modernize, I know we agreed on this, but we just need to have one more feature. It's like just there constantly, and it never goes away. So what can we do about this?
Indeed. Oops. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you click.
I will go.
Click's yours.
We have two
Next
clickers.
one's mine.
That's a concurrency problem. Yeah. So this is probably I think most of us would see this, right? So there is a natural inclination or imbalance to do work that's say non-modernization work, and this is what we want to do because we want to basically, as a business, we want to succeed. But the issue is that many times that work is like, these are the quick wins, right? Who has heard the low-hanging fruit, right? Oh, just more this little thing here. And here, you have things like, okay, we need to prepare to scale to new geographies, or we need to refactor these systems so that we get our teams to be more autonomous. So this is it's a very strong thing that exists in our organizations. So in order to get into this and building up on the previous two models that we shared, we really need to position modernization as not just a technology initiative. It shouldn't be just a technology thing, right? So it should be a business enabler. And this is a lot, also the conversation is a lot about it's the short-term versus some longer-term things, right? So this is an enabler for say, business growth, longer-term opportunities.
So we have 12 minutes left. Do you think we're going to finish on time or not?
I'm confident, Nick.
Okay. So when we think about all these things that are taking modernization balance away from modernization, how do we start to address this problem? And we really have to understand the system of work in our company. How is work flowing? And why is the work that we want to happen not happening in the way we want it to happen? So a very common pattern is, well, there's a few different patterns here. This is based on some real experiences. And basically, well, let me quickly talk you through what's going on here. So in this company, the IT department is a separate, so you have a big company, and the company is organized into separate sub-companies. And all the IT teams are part of this separate company. They report into a different CTO, and they're not part of these product organizations or these business units that they're actually doing work for. And so what happens in these kind of scenarios is the IT teams are measured on things like story points. It's about, how efficient are you getting work done? And the work is coming from the more business-oriented, like the product organization, and the work flows across. And there's usually some boss in between that decouples the people doing the planning of the work from the people actually doing the work. And so the problem we have here is we have misaligned incentives. The people doing the work aren't incentivized by the same outcomes as the people planning the work. And we also don't have a feedback loop from the people on this side and the people actually doing the work and going back in the opposite direction. Yeah. So what can we do about this, Eduardo? How can we get these incentives aligned and put these feedback loops in place?
Value streams, that's, no. Yeah, so this is, all, again, a bit related with it's a almost real story. So big part of our work with this customer was how can we get from the vertical, right, incentives and ways of working to more horizontal, where you actually are able to get product and engineering working together, owning and evolving these things. So this was a big part of our work here. And the slides got a bit messed up, so there were some colors there, but they're on the black sticky. And this starts getting us more aligned incentives. And we use the word more aligned incentives very carefully here, because you still see these, there are two organizations there, right? There will still be some managers of the IT people and some managers of the product people. But we start getting on the way to actually be able to understand we are owning this, we are going to build this together. We are all listening to our customers, so shorter feedback loops.
What happened to that person who was acting as a wall in between? Where did they go?
That person was embedded somewhere. We didn't. No, but in this case, very realistically, that person just became part of one of these value streams and actually doing rather well. So you can transform yourself, Nick.
And so what we really want to get to achieve that balance is to have a situation where we have a clear agreement on, at a strategic level, what kind of modernization effort are we working towards, aka what is a long-term business outcome that we're working towards. And when those silos are removed and the groups are working more closely, the people doing the work will start to understand when things are out of balance. In the previous model, they weren't really able to provide feedback and say, the amount of modernization work we're doing has significantly dropped, and this long-term outcome we're achieving through modernization is massively at risk. So that's what we want to try and get to with that feedback loop. Anything else you would like to add here?
No.
Okay, so we have 8 minutes to do the last section. We need to slow down.
Yeah.
Think of some jokes quickly.
The fourth model that we would like to talk a bit is like when we are doing this work, naturally there are dependencies that are coming up, because you need to keep in mind that you have a legacy system. There are things that are intertangled, and we need to cater for that in this journey. And Nick will, in 4 minutes, guide us through a quick example from Nick's actually work now.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk you through something that we've done at PayFit, which was quite interesting recently. So around the work, identifying and removing blockers. So as a very high-level overview, what we're trying to get to is an architecture that looks a bit like this, where we have different pieces, and they talk via events, loosely coupled architecture. Doesn't necessarily have to be microservices. That's not the takeaway here. So it should be easy, right? You just take your legacy system, you break it into pieces, and you send an event from this piece to this piece. Turns out it's actually a lot more difficult than you think, and not for technical reasons. And the reason is because we have all of these words and phrases and concepts in the legacy system, and they don't really correspond with how people talk about the business anymore. So when we say, what's the relationship between an employee and a profile, a personal email, and a user account? How are all of these things supposed to be fit together? In a legacy system, we have different conceptions of how these things fit together, and that causes problems. So we were blocked because we didn't really understand what the domain was supposed to look like. And the legacy wasn't making it clear how these new boundaries and events between things should be implemented. We lacked a glossary and an understanding of the business. And maybe you can explain what me and my friends at PayFit were going through in this situation. What was the underlying pattern that we fell into?
Yeah, so this is what we are, the sort of the visualization you can have here. So if a few years, long time ago, everyone was seeing a triangle, right? A few years back, we were aligned, and that's a new application and all fine. But then as you move forward, you keep on pushing. Why don't we add just this thing? And if we put this triangle upside down, it looks almost like a rectangle, so maybe we can get it going, and one thing leads to the other, and we just evolve. And we get into this drift from what's the code model, what's in production, and what people are thinking. And this leads to a lot of challenges.
So the problem we had at PayFit was, because of this lack of clarity, it was affecting multiple teams, and we couldn't continue modernizing because of this lack of clarity. And when teams can't modernize because of lack of clarity, they either go back to feature work, and that's the balance we saw, or they will implement short-term workarounds whilst they're waiting for a clarity on the longer-term vision, and those short-term workarounds are obviously more complexity and more problems. So I've got an example for you from PayFit that was super interesting, quite simple, but really captures these concepts. So when PayFit was first created, you had the concept of an employee. An An employee is someone who works for a company. They've got personal information. They've got a contract, which explains why they work at the company and how much they get paid, and other information. And then the company and product evolved because some employees can have multiple contracts. And it's like, oh, that thing we call an employee, we can't have two employees which represent the same employee because that would be weird, so let's just call it a contract. So then in some parts of the code it's called employee, and in some parts of the code it's called a contract. And people use these two words interchangeably, and then over time this progressively gets worse. And so to unblock this situation, to try and get a modernization roadmap in a good place where multiple teams could continue executing, we talked to the domain experts and asked them to explain, how do you see these concepts now? And they said, well, we see this concept of a collaborator that has a personal profile. In the current model, every time you have a separate contract with the same employee, you duplicate their personal information. And that causes problems because when someone wants to update their personal information, we have multiple versions of it. Sometimes you might pick the wrong email address, for example. And also, a contract became a subtype of a bigger concept called a working agreement. But in the old system, it's still called a contract. So getting to this model started to help us see, okay, this is what we need to implement in the new system. And what we did to get the level of clarity needed was we created this model that identifies what are these different concepts and how should they relate to each other in the new model. If I have a collaborator, then a guarantee I can give to anyone in the company is if you have a collaborator ID, there is only ever one profile linked to that ID. Whatever domain you work in, that's a rule that you can rely on. So we define these relationships, teams have the clarity, and we've been using this model for teams to work independently. We create RFCs, we refer back to this model. So we didn't set out to model the whole company and create this wonderful diagram in Archimate as Kenny recommended. We just did what we needed to do to clarify the key concepts so that teams could keep moving and modernization didn't get blocked. I won't go through all this because we don't have enough time, but basically it was a series of workshops, some workshops in single teams, workshops across multiple teams, and then we used an RFC to get feedback on the ideas, used an ADR to make a decision, and then we continue to use that model and we raise awareness wherever possible. That's basically it. So let's do a quick recap in the 2 minutes we have remaining.
1 minute and 18 seconds.
Okay, so firstly, you want to modernize and you want to keep modernizing after a workshop where you talked about modernizing, identify your skills gaps and put in place a plan to address that skills gap. But remember, it's not a simple linear journey. It's not a 2-day workshop that's going to address that skills gap.
We will share the slides afterwards, but second one is about scaling, right? So AMET, beautiful, but now what? How can we get everyone doing it? So this was our second model. Third model is the balancing act between modernizing and modernizing.
Just one more feature. I promise you, just one more feature, Eduardo. I promise you, it will be the last one. No more one more features after this.
So this will be there. This is very important to acknowledge and try to frame when you are starting and executing. And last but not the least, this one that Nick just shared. So we will drift. So the workshops that Nick mentioned, having this continuous work, if you were in Andrew's talk in the morning, like sharing what's happening, how are we evolving, to avoid that the drift is just increases, right? So
one of the key things I would say about this drift is, and how it relates to work is, as we continue to modernize, and we got deeper and deeper into core parts of the system, and we have to start really thinking about these core concepts, that's when we start to discover some of these deeper issues and how they're impacting us. We don't identify all these things in the initial workshop. And so when you think about your roadmap and continuing to execute modernization, it's important to be looking for this drift early, try and identify the problem sooner before it becomes a blocker.
Thank you.